Why hello all my virtual loves and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome. My name is Kayleen, and if you couldn't tell, I make Animal Crossing videos, so if that's something you like, how about you subscribe and ring the notification button. I'm adding it in early this time. But in today's video, we're actually going to cover how I take photos in game and what I do to edit them, how I edit them, the apps that I use, and any tips and tricks I might have. Editing photos is such a personal thing. It really is different person to person, island to island. So I wanted to share how I go about editing photos and, you know, how I think about it. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys, and let's get into the video. Alright, so starting off, we are actually on my Garden Core island of Lumiere, and this is actually my newest island, so there isn't too much on here, but I thought this entrance would be the perfect spot to show you guys how I take my photos. So jumping straight into it, opening up the Camera Pro app, and if you have your game updated, at this point everyone does, the way you get the new camera angles is by redeeming Nook Mile tickets, so you could get the full Camera Pro. So you have fancy options like handheld camera, tripod camera, and then bird's eye view. So I like to always take my first, I like to call it more of a medium wide angle first, because this is always a good option to have. I like to take at least 4 different options, and then I usually use around 3. And also pick a time of day that really works for you. For example, I like to take my photos between 8:30 and 10:30 a.m. The reason for that is because the way I edit my photos, I like them to be very neutral, and this time of day there's just a lot less yellow that you have to work with. So it's not as harsh, it's more neutral, and it really brings colors true to tone, at least more so than other times of the day. But of course, that is your own personal preference. Just pick a time of day that works for you. So for this first shot, we're going to wait for the clouds to go, and this is actually the perfect time to have taken that photo. So I always like to wait for those clouds to pass and then snap a shot really quickly. And then if we go back here, I could click the minus button and switch to a handheld camera. It's a little bit difficult to navigate, but if you use your joystick, you can move your character. So your left hand joystick moves your character back and forth, side to side. Your right hand joystick moves the camera up and down. You can't go left to right though, so it's a little bit hard to navigate. But if you use the arrows, you can move the camera all the way up or all the way down. Just be careful using left and right on the arrows, because it actually toggles the camera on an angle, which I don't personally like, but maybe that could make for some cool photos. So here I'll move a little bit further just to get a little bit close up. I like to move this down slightly. I'll angle it down a little bit more, move it up a little bit more, and that looks like a pretty good shot. So the last picture that I want to take is a bird's eye view mailbox shot photo. So a lot of you may have seen that we can now take angled photos with the Camera Pro. So I like to go right in the middle of any build that I want to take a photo of to get a great mailbox shot. Of course, that's going to differ build to build. You might not be able to get right in the middle, but it's going to take a little bit of experimenting. Opening up the Camera Pro app, we'll go to handheld. From handheld, we'll go to tripod. And from tripod, you'll get the bird's eye view camera. So you click the minus button again. You just move your villager out of the way, and this will give you different options. So if you toggle down, it'll give you a bird's eye view. If you toggle back up, it'll give you a close-up view, but you want to keep it right at the initial neutral stage where you first open the bird's eye view camera. And if you toggle left and right, it'll give you that bird's eye view. So I actually want to take this photo from the left hand side. So if you toggle left, you'll get this angle, and you can move up and down to get more of the build. side to side. But for this build, that looks about right. So we just wait for those clouds to pass by a little bit. And, oh, no, there is another one. We'll just wait for that to pass by and we'll have the last photo that I want to use. So I suggest around 3 to 4 shots usually work for finding a good one that you would want to use to edit. And that concludes the photo taking part. So let's jump into editing. So the first thing we want to do for editing is open our Lightroom app. I'm going to be using the desktop version because that's what I have available for recording this video, but I do also use the Lightroom app, and that is what I'm assuming most of you will be using to edit on the go and edit in-game photos. But do not worry, the desktop and app version are pretty similar now, so there aren't too many differences, and I will try to also put a screen recording of how I edit this on my phone, or where you could locate all of these different tools. So getting started, we will open up our Lightroom. And Lightroom is completely free to download mobile, so that is great news for everyone. Let's make this a little bit bigger. As you can see, the 3 photos that we just took on Lumiere are here. I already loaded them up, and what you want to do is just pick the photo you want to start editing on. I always like to choose the one that seems a little bit darker and more difficult to edit, because then it'll be easy to just adjust exposure when you add that preset onto the rest of the photos that you took. So first thing that I like to do when I have my photo up is quickly look at it and analyze what colors I want to work with, what colors I want to remove, and the type of tone that I want to aim for. As I mentioned earlier, I really like to go for more of a neutral look, but I'll show you along the way how you can make things warmer, cooler, depending on what you want. So right off the bat, the in-game shot that we have here, as you could tell, is very yellow toned. Even though we took this in that time frame that I mentioned earlier, 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. Just the way the graphics in the game are built, they really do lean a little bit warmer. So the way you could tell how yellow this photo is if you look at the castle walls over here, and even the gazebo in the middle. The things that are supposed to be a little bit more white, a little bit more gray, just kind of have a yellow hue to them. So we know we want to remove that. We also want to add some clarity, reduce some noise, and I'll explain what I mean along the way, but that's where we're at. So once you've decided sort of the colors you want to pop and how you want to edit this, you could then go to the different features in your toolbar. So I'll show that on a little screen grab right now, how you could find the different tools that you want to use. But I always suggest starting with your exposure, your contrast, your highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, all of that right over here on this side. So taking a look at this, I think we want to add a little bit of exposure, and I always suggest at least adding plus 20 of exposure to any in-game photos, because that gives you a nice slate to work with. I also suggest turning your highlights all the way down and your shadows all the way up 100%. So highlights to -100 and shadows to +100. And the reason why you do this is because by lowering all your highlights and getting rid of all your shadows, you're bringing out all the details that are in the photo. And this is also a great tip for real life photography as well. So that's a great thing that you want to do. I usually leave my whites just exactly how they are, unless I want certain whites to pop a little bit more, but then you could always do that at the end. And for blacks, I like to turn this all the way down to between -40 and -60. For this photo, it looks like -55 is just right. And I like to do this instead of using contrast because this makes it look a little bit more realistic, while adding a lot of contrast will just make it look very rough. So that is my advice. Then we want to move into texture, clarity, vibrance, saturation, all of that, which on the app is its own section. Texture, I usually add just a tiny bit, anywhere between +2 to +5, but we're going to do +3 for this one. Clarity, we do want to add quite a bit just because we are working with an in-game photo, so it's going to take a little bit more to make it look crisp. So we're going to add around +20, and usually I keep that the same for any photo, so that should also work for you. Dehazing, vibrance, and saturation. I'm not really gonna mess with that for this photo, but maybe we'll come back and look at it. So once we have our base done, so our exposure is good, our highlights are good, texture is good, shadows are good, we then want to move into the curve, which on the app is in the same section as exposure. So that would be this graph right here. What you want to do on the curve graph is this really helps manipulate the overall lighting. So exposure will lighten the entire photo in its entirety, for lack of a better word, but the curve will go in on smaller details. So I like to do a similar thing to black, so I will lower the exposure on the curve actually, but keep the exposure higher on the actual exposure option. And then if you click on the actual curve line, you could add more dots along this graph. So I'm going to add one down here. And what this does is that this section of the line from this point to that point will now be individual from the rest of the line. And what that allows you to do is if you curve this line up, you'll get even more blacks. But this process will actually make it look a little bit more paper-like. You may want to avoid this if you prefer a more crisp look, but I like to go for something just a little bit softer so that it works with my neutral colors. So now we get into the fun part. We get into the colors, and this is where the real difference is seen. And I always suggest doing this after you've figured out your base, so that you don't later have to go and adjust everything else. If you do the colors first, they're going to look different once you add in exposure, highlights, shadows. So we want to get that out of the way first. So you'll see this on the app as well, where you have Hue, Saturation, and Luminance. Hue will change the actual color. Saturation will make it more saturated, less saturated. So a green will be more green. You take it out, it'll go towards not having that color. So think of it as a spectrum, where one end is the color at its full vibrancy and the other end is without that color at all. So you use that to sort of take out what you need and add what you need. And then luminance is how the color will appear. So either really light on the white end or really dark. So it's like adjusting the lighting of the color rather than the color itself. So if we look at our photo, the thing that we mentioned first was that we had a lot of yellow. So if we go into saturation, the first thing we want to do is try to remove some of that yellow. I like to remove at least anywhere from 50 to 70% of the yellow. So already you could see how much of a difference that makes. We're going to go for 60 on this photo. So that looks around right. So if you go to the before and after, and on the app, you just hold the photo itself and it'll show you how it looks like before. But if you're working on the desktop, you just click this double Y on the bottom left hand side of the photo. You could already see how much different the photo looks. That's actually crazy, you guys. See, right here on the left hand side is the original photo, and here on the right is what we've already done editing wise. Already a major change. So the next thing you want to tackle is something along the same lines as yellow is orange and reds. You could tell right here on the cliffs that there's a lot of orange. And I don't really like that. Maybe that's your thing. You might want to keep that tone of orange if that's what you're going for. But that's not really my vibe. So we're going to tone down the oranges. So right here in the saturation, we're going to bring it down to a range of anywhere from 20 to 40. For the purposes of this one, I think 30 should be fine. And we're getting more towards that brown color, that neutral beigey color that I like to use in my photos. But then now you could see that there's quite a bit of red in there. And we kind of want to take that out. I want to take that out. So then I'll bring down the reds a little bit. And once again, I want to remind everyone that not everything is a one size fits all. So you're going to have to play around with the colors quite a lot. So we're going to just quickly go through that. -20 looks good. So now I'm going to go in and adjust the other colors very quickly now that I've shown you what you guys could do with saturation. And then we'll move on to hue and luminance. So I'm going to work on this for just a hot second. Alright, so this is what we've ended up with. I usually take out purple and magenta, so that's why you see those at -100, but most colors I try to bring down quite a bit. And once again, that's because I'm aiming for that neutral tone, so I have to take out a lot of color from the in-game photo. So looking at how this looks right now, it looks a little bit light. It looks a little bit, you know, dreary and without color, but I just took out all the colors, so what can we do to bring out the color that currently exists in here? That is when we go into luminance. And this, as I had mentioned before, really targets the lighting of the color, not so much the color itself. So I really want to bring out the green in here. Right now it looks a little bit washed out. And a good way to make the color a little bit more bold is by making it darker. So here you could see on this little line of color that it goes to a light green, and then over here to black on the left hand side. I'll show you guys how that looks like on the app, but it's pretty much identical. So we're going to lower the greens, and immediately you could tell that they're popping out a little bit more. I actually always suggest keeping luminance to a maximum of -25, because if you go lower than that, you start losing the color too. So you don't want to go too extreme with either or. Right to 25. There we go. Perfect. So if we go into our before and after, you can tell there's so much of a difference already. The whites are whiter, the greens are greener. We took out that yellow. But now that I'm looking at it, I want to do something about the orange. It looks a little bit too light to me. So I might bring down the orange to like a -10. And then I'll continue playing around with the other colors. I don't think we really need to worry about any of the other ones. Maybe red, maybe yellow. But this is a good time for you to play around and see what works for your photo. Alright, so once we're at a good place with luminance, we want to go into the hue tab. And this is where you could really manipulate the color itself, so you could change it. My favorite thing to do is play around with yellow and green, especially green. So if you are, depending on what season you're taking the photo in, you might be taking it in winter, fall, spring, summer. You might not like the actual tone of the green in game. So this is a good place where you can manipulate it. So say for example, you're in the fall, but you don't like that muddy brown green. You could make it look more like the spring and summer green by changing the hue. And I'm actually going to do that with the greens here. So this photo was taken around mid-September in game. So it was still in that summer mode, but going into fall mode. So I want to do, if you go right here, you'll see the green. One spectrum's yellow, the other spectrum is aqua. So if you move it towards the aqua side on the right, it starts getting more of a deeper green, like a true green. And I like to bring this to around 15. If you go into the before and after, you see how that green changed from that yellowy green to more of a true foresty green. And you can even bring it even further if that's the tone you want to go for. On the other hand, if you bring it towards the yellow on the left hand side, it'll look more like a fall green. So some of you may want to do that. I know it's very popular with cottagecore, but since I'm doing a garden core island, I really want to bring out those more foresty deep green colors. So then you could go ahead and play around with the rest of them and just see what works for you. So once you're done with that, we're kind of getting there. We're almost there to the finish line. So next thing you want to do is pretty optional. You don't have to do this. If you're totally happy and this part is a little bit intimidating for you, you totally don't have to do it. But sometimes even when you've played around with the exposure, you've played around with the colors, something still doesn't feel right. And that is when you could get into color grading. Color grading is a little bit more advanced. It's even more of an additional layer that you could really manipulate. The app used to not have color grading, and as Adobe has been integrating more of the desktop version into their Lightroom app, they have been bringing in all these extra details. So I like to use color grading. It is a great way to play around with your midtones, your shadows, and your highlights, which are the three circles that you have right here. So one thing I would suggest is, if you're going to play around with all three, you don't want to make any saturation more than like a plus 20, because then you might be doing too much. I would try to keep things to 2 of the 3. Usually I suggest either midtones and shadows or highlights and shadows. Shadows are a great way to really change the dark spots in your photo, and the midtones will just get true to color. Highlights, usually a little bit not necessary, but again, play around with it, see what works for you. It's pretty straightforward. Oh, that seems to have popped on there. Ignore my little toolbar. That seems to popped on the wrong timing in this video, but taking a look at your shadows. So I know I wanted to go very neutral, but I still want to bring a little bit of warmth back. So I want to bring it to this side where it's yellow, orange, and red. And if you toggle back and forth, you'll see how the color manipulates and changes. So I'm not going to worry about saturation right now because I'm trying to find the right tone, but usually around between the orange and the yellow is where I like to put my shadows so that my shadows don't seem too cold. You then could go in and play around with the saturation. So if you look at it, it has H is a hue, which I have it at 50, and S is a saturation. I would never go above a 15 saturation on color grading, because as I said earlier, it can be a little bit harsh. So for this one, we're going to keep it at around 10. And that already looks so much warmer, but still neutral. So I'm okay with how it looks like right now. I don't think I need to play around with midtones. I don't think I need to play around with highlights. I think we're going to keep it just as is, but this is a great way to really customize your editing to your own theme or island. So as we move further down or further along the tools on the app, we'll get to the actual detail work. And this is one of the last steps you will take on Lightroom. So that is the sharpening, the noise reduction, etc. And what this does is it will really make your photo look crisp. It is that final touch. There's another final touch that I will let you guys in on at the end, but we want to try to get as much editing done on Lightroom before we introduce any other apps. So sharpening, I like to put it at a 15 or a 20. We're going to do 15 for this one. And that already looks so much better. Noise reduction is great. What noise reduction does is when you zoom in on a photo, you'll see little fuzzy bits on the color. And this will reduce that. It'll flatten it and it'll make it look very digital. That's something you want to be careful on. You don't want to add too much. But since we're dealing with a in-game shot and everything is animated and not real, we don't have to worry about it too much. So my safety number for noise reduction is usually a 30. And we're going to do the same for color noise reduction. So on the desktop, you'll see everything is filtered under noise reduction, but on the app, you'll have noise reduction and then color noise reduction. Those are the two that you want to mess around with. Something you'll also see in that same section on the app, which will be a little bit different from the layout here on the desktop version, is vignette. And what the vignette does, and that is right over here, is that it'll just sort of focus it towards the middle of your photo if you add a tiny bit of it. So if you go towards the dark spectrum, which is usually on the left hand side, so if you toggle vignette down to a -5, I don't know if you guys could see that, but it just adds black to the edges ever so slightly, just so your eyes focus towards the middle of the photo, and that's super helpful. And then moving along, you could totally add some grain if that's what you want to do. I don't like to do that. Actually, that might be everything. Yeah, I think that's everything. I'll show you guys where everything is located and found on the app itself. So I'll throw a little bit of a screen recording as I'm talking about it. So you might have already seen it at this point of the video. But let's quickly take a look at our before and after. And that is the finished product. Well, not finished. We still have another step to go. But for the purposes of Lightroom, this is how you want to end up with everything. So I went very neutral, made the greens pop out. I took out the yellow. I added a lot of sharpening, clarity, noise reduction, just to make this look as realistic as possible. So once we are satisfied and done with our photo, we could actually export it. So you don't have to really worry about this on the mobile app. You could just export it and it will save it to your camera roll. I suggest doing that. It'll automatically condense it. So we could skip that and I will show you guys a quick screenshot of how that's done. So leaving the photo up, I want to tell you guys about one final step that you want to take to really just elevate your photo. There is an app that is a photo enhancer called Yami 2X, and it's a free app. You could download it and it's a great one to use when you want to just add an extra step, because even when you add in all the noise reduction, the clarity on Lightroom, once you upload it to Instagram will really lower the quality of your photo, so you want to prevent that. And Yami 2X helps with that. So once you have the app downloaded, what you want to do is click the plus button in the middle, add your photo, and you want to make sure that you are on the anime photo option, not the illustration option. So click that. And you want to make sure noise reduction is on max. And once that is done, you want to just click one or all. If you're doing more than one, you could do up to 3 photos at once on here, and it'll render it. So once it is processed, what you want to do is toggle that middle bar all the way over, and you'll see it is fully rendered now. Then you want to just click the arrow on the right hand side, and you might get an ad or two. That's the one issue about a free app, so just be patient with it. And once you close out of the ad, you could save the photo and then it's ready to go. So hopefully that was very helpful for you guys. You now have a completed photo. I know my tips and tricks might not work for everyone, but hopefully it helps guide how you can make your photo look really real while edited and ready to present on whatever social media you want to share your photos with. I know a lot of people are coming into the community, so I just wanted to put out a little bit of a helpful video for how to edit your photos and make them look the best quality possible, since it could be a little bit confusing and daunting, especially since the in-game shot just isn't quite there. It's not great. It could be better. And I know a lot of people are against editing, but for those that are open to it, hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment down below, or you could DM me on Instagram or Twitter. I'll try to get back to as many of you as possible. So thank you so much for joining me on this video. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell. I know I already said it at the beginning of the video, but just to reiterate. So thank you so much. Have a great morning, evening, afternoon, night, wherever you are. Bye, my loves.